Welcome to the Future Proof Leader. I'm Jessica Rapach, founder of Twin Legacy Solutions. And today I have Andi Simon, and she is the founder of Simon Associates. So today we're talking a little bit about change management, and we're going to dive into a little bit of retirement, and I would love to do that as well. So Andi, I'm going to give you the floor. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
What a delightful introduction. I thank you very much. I am Andi Simon. I'm a corporate anthropologist, and I've been in business for 24 years. And I launched my business as a corporate anthropologist after 20 years in corporate roles, helping organizations as an executive change. I was in banking during deregulation. I was in healthcare during managed care, and I learned that humans hate change. And as an anthropologist, I knew that. And prior to that, I had spent 10 years in academics, and I had gotten my tenure, finished my doctorate, had postdoctorate work, had taken my daughters to Greece to study Greek women when they were little. But I love things that are going through transformation and change. You mentioned retirement. My newest book out called Rethink Retirement just came out, and it's about how we're moving through this great transition. How can we open up this leadership question at a time of traumatic and dramatic change? And humans by and large, evolved even though we had to change without wanting to. Our brains hate me. So I've enjoyed my journey, but it's not without some pain along the way.
Oh, I can imagine. Have so much to talk about. And I have three daughters, and that sounds like a dream to take them out of the country and teach them a little bit more. I'm a coach and a mentor. I own a couple businesses, but I've been pretty firm about making sure that I make time to teach at our local schools at least once a week because I think it's so important to have that mentorship and just to get their perspectives. These little children, they're our future. So I think it's so important to make them important. Okay, let's dive into questions. I'm excited. So you described yourself as a corporate anthropologist. Now, for people that don't exactly know what that might mean, can you explain that a little bit further and why it's so relevant today?
Well, when I discovered anthropology as an undergraduate at Penn State, it was one of those epiphanies. In fact, when I met my husband, I was 19 and he was a bit older, and he said, "What do you want to be?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be an attorney or an anthropologist. I have fallen in love with anthropology." And he said, "Oh, be an anthropologist and I'll be here for you." Well, we're married 58 years later, and he is.
Oh,
But the
amazing.
discovery was that I really love the way anthropology looked at how humans get things done. How have we evolved? And how has a body changed? What is so unique about humans that we have populated the entire earth, for better or worse, and we're all of the same species. So there's some real interesting parts of that. Now, about 40,000 years ago, plus or minus how many years you'd like to say, and we had a quantum leap in our brain, and we began to be meaning makers. And I say that because it became our differentiating. We didn't just see food, we gave it meaning. It was everything about us had some significance, not just functional, but some purpose to it. And we became quite clever and creative at creating this thing called culture. And culture is what makes us a really wonderful, unique species, although I don't think we're the only one. If you've been to Africa at all, you get really humbled by the complexity of the species all over the earth. But we are particularly happy with designing a way of doing things that we think is the way we should do it. And we each have our own story, which becomes the one that we think is the way we should be. As you and I were talking, you've had several stories. You have been a mother, you were in the military, you're a coach, you're a teacher. We have many stories about who we are, and that's how we live our lives. I became really interested in the application of this after getting my degree and getting my tenure. And then my husband was in banking during deregulation and at a cocktail party. And it's meaningful for the story because I don't think life has a straight path. It has lots of conversations. We were having a great conversation at this cocktail party with senior leaders, one of whom said to me, "Why don't you come help us change?" And I said, "You don't know anything about anthropology. I don't know anything about banking. I think this could work." And so I took a leave for a year to see what business was like on the other side. And I must confess, I have no regrets about leaving academia. I was a visiting professor in 2007 at Washington University in St. Louis teaching entrepreneurship. And I have a leadership academy I've been teaching for 8 years at Appalachian Regional Healthcare. So I've applied the educational side and I haven't lost it, but I also realized that change is about teaching people new ways, new habits to get things done. And the minute I got into banking, I realized they really didn't know what to expect from me. And so I had sort of this carte blanche to discover what was happening and how do you change people who, by and large, came to work from 9 to 12 and 1 to 3. If they didn't steal, they had a job for life. And now you want them to do what? And the language, I want you to sell. I want you to service. I want you to have conversations with customers. I want you to manage this bank, not just for the regulatory results, but to grow it. And those words for humans had no meaning. And so then the question was, how do you put into place methods for them to learn how to do, which won't ever match what you think they should be doing? And so between using theater and movies and videos and having them begin to design new ways of doing things, I began to learn with them about a process. You mentioned change management. This is really interesting because the first thing they say is we don't do that. And I said, I know, that's why we're going to figure out how to change. And theater is a wonderful metaphor because if Robert Redford can play many different roles on stage, so can you. You just need a script, you need rehearsal time, and you need a new habit. And so I went from there, and I was senior vice president of one bank and executive vice president of another, all going through change. And I then got into healthcare during managed care by chance. Someone called and said, I have a job at Montefiore Medical Center. You're interested? And I said, what is it? Well, we're going to help them change. And I said, sure, I can do that. Did I know what that was? No. Did they know what I did? No. But sometimes you're just in the right place and it comes along. And after 7 years there, it was after 9/11, I went into my own business. And to be candid, my great PR fellow, John Roscom, listened to me tell a story just like I'm telling you. And he said, oh, Andi, you're a corporate anthropologist that helps companies change. And I said, bingo. I said, what? And he said, I have no idea. I said, I don't either, but I'm it. And I don't think if you, at the time you Googled corporate anthropology, there were dozens of us that came up, maybe. It has expanded. And I have learned, I've inspired others to do it. But a lot of it is not staying within the academic environment. It's about applying it so that others' businesses can understand how an anthropological lens, a perspective, can really add value innovatively. Because, and I put my book behind me when we started to talk. My first book is called On the Brink, A Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights. Came out in 2016, and it was about 8 of our clients who had been stuck or stalled. And we went exploring with them. They said, what does an anthropologist do? I said, we hang out. Let's go explore. And let's see what's actually going on. Let's listen to the phones that are calling. Take your mind off what you do, and let's listen to what people, like your customers, would like you to do. And every time you say, no, we don't, stop. You got to manage your mind and think about the ideas that your customers are coming up with, as opposed to the things that you do so well. Because that might be fine. And if business is growing, stick with it. But I had stuck clients. They didn't grow. A healthcare client, pharmaceutical client, a college. It didn't matter what flavor they were, same problem. And so a little anthropology opened up the door to opportunities. And I got wonderful reviews on the book, great clients. It was my first of 4. And then I'll just put a little pitch in for my new one. It's called Rethink Retirement. And it's about this new age, this stage that we're in, that is going to be an enormous transformation of what happens in the United States and perhaps across the globe. Because we are finally realizing that there won't be a labor force. There'll be 20 million less people in the labor force here because they're all retiring. Maybe. The reason I wrote the book was because neither my husband nor I plan on retiring. But I have 30 stories in there of the 60 I interviewed of people who have or have not and the kinds of experiences they have. And it is an interesting time to think about change, about how people know what they know, but nobody has practiced retirement. And unless they go and experiment, and I asked everybody, did you try it first? No. I had one person, yes. And everyone else said no. So it's like I dropped you in a foreign country. You can't speak the language. You don't know the routine. You don't know who you are. So it's an interesting time for our society in companies because they're not preparing folks well. And when they leave, what happens after that? So there's a whole industry opening up now to begin to understand better and help people. And it's a great transition for us. And I'm excited to share that with you. So your thoughts?
Well, you covered so many things. And as you talked, I kind of thought about like my own life. Like, first, I will say we are very much similar and we're on the same page about the fact that I live my life. I always tell people if you asked me or told me what I was going to be doing 10 years ago, now I would have laughed in your face. I would have been like, yeah, okay, sure. Never going to happen. Not a chance. My life is, I'm grounded in my faith. So I always kind of like pray about like whatever opportunity is going to come my way, I'm going to take it without if overarching like Jessica, you should do this. I'm going to follow my heart and I'm going to try to go for it. And I think that's maybe what I should be. So I've done that a lot in my life. My problem is that I say yes to too much, and people will say, Jessica, how do you do everything? And I say, well, I do say no sometimes, but I am very big on accepting a challenge. So, and I feel like it's paid off. Like, I think it really pays off when you're like, I have no idea what this is about, but I'm going to do it because what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm going to fail and then I move on. But there's a lot of people I know, especially like my age group, my friend group, they're like, I would never take a chance like that. I quit my job, started my own business. Two businesses, three businesses. Well, weren't you scared? Yeah, sure, I was scared. But what's the worst thing that can happen? I go back and get a job. And what's the best thing that could happen? I have time, flexible schedule. I could be a mother. I could show up in all areas of my life and prioritize what I want to on my schedule. But isn't it hard? Of course it's hard. But isn't anything worth doing difficult? So I love the connection there. We're very similar in that. And I loved your story. Like, oh yeah, I'm an anthropologist. You're a banker. We have nothing in common. Let's do it. So I love that.
And I will echo back to you. We are landsmen because most folks look at us and say, how do you do it?
Yes.
I said, I don't even think about it. Door opens, you go through, you don't know where you're going, but let's go on a journey. Have fun.
Yeah. And I like to surround myself. I mean, it's fun. Most of my friends are not like this, but you find a couple that are. And my business partner, we met in the Marine Corps 20 years ago. We've been best friends ever since. She's more of a risk taker than I am. She's like, let's do it. Okay, fine. She's a risk taker. I'm myself an aggressive optimist because I just, anyway.
It's a good name, an aggressive optimist. I like that.
You gotta be. So there's that. And then you mentioned Africa. I was deployed in Africa, so I know exactly what you're talking about. A lot of animals jumped on a lot of our convoys. It was very interesting. And it's just totally different way of life over there. Like just totally perspective slap in the face. In a good way. It opens your life a little bit when you travel out of the country.
Well, I've been out in Africa 3 times. We planned a fourth trip when the pandemic hit. My husband and I have been to 40 countries across the globe. We're explorers. And I can only tell you with kids, the Explorer opens you up. We have some of the best discussions in hot air balloons over Africa. I mean, you'd be amazed. We talk about the things that are changing us and make it up. You can imagine it. So I can imagine the animals on your convoys going across wherever you are. But Africa is an amazing place. Love it.
Yes, it's beautiful. Very hot, but very beautiful. And then you touched on something. I don't know why I thought of this, but my whole life, even growing up, people say retirement. And I just think retirement means you're 65 to 67 years old, you're retiring, and then that's it. You're done with your career, you live at home, whatever. Um, and then you asked me before, did you retire from the military? I said, no, I didn't. And then that different perspective is, that's right. People retire from one thing and then move on to the next thing. So I had a list of questions, but I guess I'm going to dive away from those a little bit because let's talk about retirement in the sense of, well, what arena do you work in? Do you work in with people who are retiring at, age 40, but they're retiring from one career and getting into another career? Or does retirement in your definition mean you're at the end of your working life, you've retired, and now you're going into just using your retirement savings, etc.? Where do you fall on that?
Well, the question really is how, so let's be anthropological about this. So the age of 65 came about because Social Security decided that most people died at 62, so 65 was a good year. They won't ever taste it, right? Didn't quite work out that way.
Right.
The second thing is the first things you spoke about are more like career transitions.
Yeah.
And people sort of are comfortable or more expecting because they go from one job or career, Marines or whatever, into something else. You get a job. And there's some structure, there's sort of some form around it. The challenge that has happened is that there's no real date for retiring,
Right.
although society would say 65, are you going to retire?
Right.
Well, yeah, I guess I can get my Medicare now and I can get my Social Security. Okay, now. But the problem is that we live many years longer. My father went to 100. My grandmother went to 97. And so consequently, regardless of where you are, the challenge is you have a third of your life, maybe more, that is going to be different than all the other things that you've done.
That's
So
right.
what I've become, as I am curious about, I'll give you the three stories that were the catalyst for this. I'm about how people are coping with a period in their lives where there's nobody telling them what to do. There's nobody who says, this is what's on your calendar, this is how you learn to retire. So the first thing was several years ago, I was invited to do anthropological research at a retirement community in Oregon, two of them. And they wanted to know why they had these beautiful facilities and people were ranking them as not good quality. And the
Mm.
CEO came to me and said, can you really help me understand? So I lived in them. I did a little anthropology. I went, I got myself in and I spent time in an assisted living facility. And I met all the folks in the independent living facility. You know, the three phases, the independent, the assisted, and the memory loss. One was very expensive and wealthy. The other one was a little bit more middle class, but same idea. Beautiful facilities, not good scores. So what I saw, I said, give me a couple of dozen folks and let me talk to them about their stories. We learn from the stories. You can do a survey, but you don't, and that's what she was doing, but she doesn't know what it means. And so I talked to people, I listened to people, and I recorded it all, and then I did a thematic analysis for her. But the themes were so profound on this thing called retirement. Many of the men in the very wealthy to-do one came there because they had been former bankers or computer whatevers or doctors or successful entrepreneurs, had businesses, sold them, had a lot of money. They weren't financially at risk. They were bored to death. And the executive director said, nobody comes to our events. And the community said, well, we have these meetings because we need something to do. And so we meet and we come up with ideas for events and for safety and for food. And then we present them to the executive director. And he promptly deletes us. And I said to him, so they're coming up with ideas and you're not hearing them. Tell me about it. He said, well, that's not their job. I said, the problem is they don't have a job. And
Mm.
so now it's time to begin to understand from their perspective why they're here. Well, we're here for their last stage in their life. I said, these are all healthy guys. They want good food to come hot with a good sommelier, because you're promised that. And then there was one woman who had cancer. And he said, well, we're here so that she'll have the easy part. She wants to have a party every Friday night with a band. And she said to me, they won't put on a party for me. And I'm saying to myself, there's an meaning to retirement here and to then the middle class one was fascinating because all but one of the folks in there were invited to go in by their children, otherwise known as put there. And they said to me, we feel like we're in prison. We're not getting out. Now you can imagine
Yeah.
the group were well-to-do enough, so they chose more or less. The second group were more, dependent upon support and to some degree, and didn't. My favorite story there was of a husband and wife who had been divorced for 30 years. His second wife had died, and their children decided that his first wife, their mother, should take care of him during this last stage of their lives. She was still a real estate broker. She said, I'm not doing this, but I'm here with him. And I thought, wow, now how do you make sense out of it? So the question is, what is this thing? Then I had a client for 8 years, an accounting firm in Houston, and they went through a very systematic retirement process. The partners who had founded the firm were reaching 65, and in accounting, that was the date for retirement. And so I was coaching their next generation on how to begin to talk to clients. They were training the next generation on how to take on the that they had. They were beginning to hand off clients so there'd be transition. And then my client, who's in my book, Paul, had a plan, experiment, he called it, not a retirement, an inspirement. And he had everything planned out for
I
him, and
love it.
he knew what he was going to be doing as he left. And it wasn't going into an independent living home. I promise you that. But he had trips planned. He has a girlfriend. He has all kinds of nonprofit work to do. He's on the board of this, and he had prepared himself really well. And then the last one is I went out to my network, and I said, folks who have retired, I'd like to interview them because my husband sold his business and he's not going to retire. He's joined mine. I don't want to retire. What's this thing called retirement? I'm not going there. And don't need to worry about this, but I'm fascinated by what's happening in companies. So they gave me people, like 60 people to interview, and they all had a different story. And each of the stories reflected their own lives. The guys who had their own business sold it and took 2 years to transition only to find themselves with nothing else to do. The woman who was a wealth manager who thought she had all these friends in the office and then she left and they're not her friends. One gentleman who left his career job only to find he has no one to have lunch with. And then there are the ones who planned well. And I have a client in there who planned really well. And he has his golf group, he has his day trading. He and his wife are going on trips. They bought an RV. So all different ways of experiencing a stage where nobody's going to tell you how to do it, but you really don't know what you don't know. So from a person who really understands change, books are beginning to come up. We're discovering, I don't know who I am. It was on my business card. I don't know how to structure my day. What do I do after I work out? I have coffee. I have nothing to do. I have nothing on my calendar for the rest of my life. What's my purpose? Why am I here? And then who's my friends? What's my community? Those who plan well have a life plan, as I'm calling it. Those who don't are really struggling. And the number of them who want to buy the business they sold back again are fascinating because they don't know what else to do with themselves. And they gave up one thing, but don't have something new. So as you're living your life, begin to think of it as another stage, but not necessarily one where we celebrate the exit and then don't realize that the person leaving the firm is taking with them all the wisdom, all the client knowledge, all the wonderful things they brought to the culture, and plan better. And so I'm developing programs for companies to begin to understand how to plan for this enormous exit that's coming, the biggest transformation they're going to experience. And it isn't about the gold watch and the party. It's really about what happens inside to the clients and to the person. It's wonderful. Isn't it exciting?
It is exciting. So I guess my question is, how do you get a corporation or are the corporations interested in investing in this for their employees? Because the value added is you
Yes.
come in and you've trained the next generation, which I think is incredible.
Right.
Incredible. That is going to be, as much as it is a change for someone to go into retirement, those roles that are now stepping into new higher roles, it's a huge change. So is that where the biggest impact is? And then do companies actually invest, which I think is so meaning. I think it's that they would invest in helping the of people who want to retire out of the workforce, helping them transition. Because you see a lot of like help for military vets to go back into the corporate environment.
Yes.
But you don't see, I've never heard of corporations actually investing in their people to out of corporate.
Yes. It's so interesting because I read that
It
this
is.
morning on a blog. I thought it was great. We do a lot of onboarding when you come in,
Yeah, but not
they're not at all for when they leave.
absolutely. I know it's, well, if you think about it, that's a really good. My mother went through this actually. She retired earlier than she thought because there was some changing in the company that she just wasn't wanting. She didn't love the direction it was going. So she decided, you know what? I think it's time for me to retire. I think I'm ready. So she took the plunge and they've saved, to me in my brain, what I've had in my life is put money away for retirement, put money for away retirement. I've never heard like set up your life. I kind of just assumed I'm going to have all my children, will have many children, and I'll be grandma. That's like my retirement. I'm going to be the best grandma ever. I'm going to be super fun. But if you think about it, you're right. You can't base your life off of somebody else assuming they're going to let you in either. So, yeah, this is interesting. So, talk more about how that works. This is change and retirement, right? So, change inside a corporation because we've all been there where something new comes out and nobody likes to change. They are stuck in their ways. It was very rare for me outside of the military. I went into the government and I had to do, or I got to do, I was honored to do IT project management at a high level, but pretty much all the secretaries went away. 30 to 50 secretaries went away. The system we were building was replacing, and some people had to do some extra work, but we made it very user friendly. But boy, implementing something where, listen, there's not, you don't have a secretary anymore, but this form that you have to fill out if you want to travel is only going to take you 30 seconds. We've done so much research. Well, I don't like it. I've never had to do it before. I don't want to do it. Well, if you want to travel, you have to do it. And this is why it's so important. Well, I don't care. I don't care about visibility. I care that I need to go travel because that's my job. It's just, I never like, oh, great, new system, amazing. Yes, I'll sit through your hour training. Of course, I'm going to love this. Of course, I'm going to love it. No, never, almost never. So it's funny. Like, tell me more about what you've run
Well,
into.
you've met the same people I have, haven't you?
I think so.
But you know, it's interesting. It becomes humbling to realize that you are challenging the very essence of who they are.
Yes.
And humans are habit driven. You're a particularly open person. So you've adapted yourself to new environments, applying your great habits and skills in different ways. And I the unfamiliar. Most people don't. So the thing about your mind is that it's habit driven. So I'll be abstract in a moment and then give you some illustrations. And in the abstract of it is that your does exactly what it thinks you want it to do. It has a story that believes it to be true. The only truth is there's no truth, but your truth is true. You know, that's your reality. It likes the familiar, not the unfamiliar. And so somehow you have to make the unfamiliar familiar. And for this person that you're describing, somehow you had to make it look as if there was a robotic secretary there who was just like what he knew to make it familiar. If not, he had to have new habits building. Now you were in the military. How'd you build habits? Routine, 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 routine,
Yes.
repetitive, repetitive. He
Okay.
finally got it done. It was no longer a big deal. But until he got it done, it was a tremendous, he was asking his mind to work hard, and it was creating all kinds of cortisol to say, go away from her, tell her she's the problem, not me. And it is a wonderful mind, but it needs a new story. And unless you create a new story, now it's very visual. And so to your question of how do you help companies change? There are a couple of different things that I've learned over the years. I created a change map. If you know where you're going, humans are futurists. If you know where you're going, it's easier to get there. Even if you don't have the plan, all done. And I use an innovation game called Remember the Future. If we have a map of where we're going to go and an idea, a really good visual picture of how we're going to do it, then I can backward plan on the steps I need to take to get there. You in the military, you know, you plan and then plan, you know, the minute they start shooting at you, the plan goes away. But by and large, you know, yeah, it's better to know where you're going. At least you'll know if you've arrived. And then there's some really interesting tools that I use. I mentioned theater, but I tell people we're going to form a of 10 folks. They can be from different departments, all the ones that are significant folks in this transformation that you're making. And we're going to let them own it. And they're going to put their ideas into how, if they own it, it's much easier for them to believe they can do it. You know, they don't, people like they like to co-create. The mind creates good energy when you're building something together. And if you're being told, you're in the military, if I tell you what to do, you'll probably stand there waiting for me to do it. But if you are empowered and enabled and supported, you'll have better ideas in better ways. You've been there. And it's the same, it's humans everywhere. And that's why, as I started to write the book about it, I realized that people really didn't know how to do what they were asking me to do. But if I trained them on how to do it, it was much more fun because I could just steer. And I said, well, how'd you do that? I said, I didn't. You did it. But once you have the tools to do it, a mind is open for new things, but not without some process. That's why retirement is so scary for so many people. You know, I used to have lunch with the folks in the office, and now they won't have lunch with me, but I don't have any friends to have lunch with. What do I do? One woman who I did a podcast with was in publishing. She's terrific. She took off, had a year doing whatever she wanted, and then she got depressed. She had nothing to do. And you know, she's on meds for depression. She said, how did this happen? I never was depressed. I liked work. What did I do when I left? And so it's up of understanding the folks. I'll tell you, in the Leadership Academy, they have had 8 years. They give me 12 emerging leaders, and our job is to turn them from good managers to good leaders.
That's
Right? And we meet once a month, and then we get together 4 times a year in person for a couple of days. And more I help them self-learn, the more they come back with small wins. They need the confidence, and they need a safe place to come back and talk about, let me tell you what I did, and let me tell you what happened. And wow, this was really cool. And I didn't even expect that to happen. And part of it is just building confidence and competence. And it's interesting to watch people grow. And then they become CEOs of this and CFOs of that. And they said, how'd you do that? I said, I did. They did. I just steered them. So it's fun. I enjoy the pain of change.
I do. I love that too. You're so dead on about empowerment too. I did this with every group I've worked with in my life. I've always got the privilege to lead people, and I always was a team leader, servant leader, same page. But I learned the hard way because I tried, when I was younger years, well, I'm in charge, so I'm going to tell everybody what to do. I've had a lot of mentors in my life to tell me, you know what? It's going to be more successful. You're going to be more successful if you take care of your people rather than try and tell them what to do. Now, if they trust you because they know you take care of them, when you do tell them what to do, they're going to listen and they're going to follow you.
Yeah.
Right. So I had a lot of leadership training, lucky to have that in my lifetime. So I learned that I had a couple quick, oh my goodness, this isn't going to work. And it was a quick realization for me early on in my career, which is great. So it is so true. I mentor kids and them, and they always tell me, well, I want to be in charge. I want to be in charge. And I always say, you need to practice what you preach, but you all to set the example, but you also need to empower. And I always say, empower your people because when they feel special, when they feel uplifted, when they feel like you're there to support them, they're going to come up with the greatest ideas and they're going to give you everything they got because
Yes.
it's their baby. It's their baby, their solutions, the things they came up with, they have buy-in because they helped create the solution. So when we succeed, it's like, oh man, remember when you came up with this idea? How cool is this? We did it. It's so
So,
cool.
yep. And
So
growth comes a step at a time. I like small wins. And
yeah.
I bet you
And
do too.
with my kids, people think like you can't do this with children. And I always go back to children. You totally can do this with children because if we're building leaders for tomorrow at those stages, they need that confidence. You're so right about that. Like I've encountered adults that really needed just little confidence. Wow, I can do this. And look, imagine if the children of today got a little boost in what they can do and believed in themselves just a little bit more, what would be coming into the workforce 10, 15 years from now, into
Yep.
college, into their studies. So I always tell, and I told my Marines, I told my workforce, I said, listen, don't come to me with problems. Come to me with your solutions and we'll talk about it and then we'll try it out. And if we fail, we'll try again. But I love that, I have your perspective on that. So it's very cool.
Well, I do
But
think our journeys have been similar, and I'm enjoying the conversation.
me too. I know. And it's nice to see you. Now you mentioned you do leadership training. Is that something that people can sign up for? Or is that, how do you get into something like that where you meet once
I
a month?
can.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me. You just, oh, door open.
Yeah, if I had to give you my life is of chance. So I was at a conference speaking about culture in healthcare. And the gentleman in the audience was a director of strategy for Appalachian Regional Healthcare in the Eastern Kentucky. And not by design, he said, let's have a drink. I said, sure. And so we sat and we talked, and he said, we need to develop an academy. And in my wonderful way, I said, now what's that? He said, I have no idea. I said, I can do that. And I went there and did a weekend retreat to see if they liked my flavor. And they came back and I met with their leadership and wanted to begin to build the next leadership. And I said, well, let's start. And before the pandemic, we did in every other month for 3-day kinds of things. And then in the pandemic, we went all online, and now we do a blend of the two, which is actually quite nice. They love the in person, and I do, but we also know that we can't. It's just complicated. They're all over the place. Some have 4-hour drives, so we blend. But the most important part is the small wins they all commit to after each session. This we were talking about culture and how do you change a culture a step at a time. And what's one thing you would like to change in your group? A little like you're talking, so that they don't depend on you, but it's a collaboration. What would be and so some of this is really giving them the competence and confidence to help others and to know the difference between tactical, practical management and inspirational, visionary leadership, where they can give them a picture of where we're going and then help them get there confidently and then give them the skills that they need to do it. It's healthcare. I can only tell you it's a rural healthcare system. That big, beautiful bill is not going to make it easy for them to do and deliver the care they need. But the people in Appalachia need care. And this organization is quite extraordinary. I'm in awe of what they're able to do and their commitment. one of which is their leader has a big commitment that food is medicine. If you eat well, you exercise. And she has a whole program for everyone out there where it becomes part of the transformation. Not just fix you when you're sick, but keep you healthy. So I'm inspired. I do it with pleasure, and they give me great pleasure. It's fun.
I love that. So we're leave on a philosophical note, right? So if someone's listening today and they're like really taking in retirement change, what's one thing they could do today to help them be successful for retirement and to that change or change in general for their company? So one thing you could take a step towards today if you've done nothing at all.
I often preach, make change your best friend. And that it sounds sort of silly, but if you have a best friend, you love to talk to them, you love to share with them, you love to do things that you might not do with a stranger. Well, if change is something that you and everyone else resists, not because you're a resistor, but when things are new and different, your intuition is to say, run away. Your brain is telling you that amygdala is hijacking it. It's not personal. But if you can manage your brain and just say to it, that's a good idea, turn a negative into a positive, you'd be amazed at how all of a sudden the idea becomes a really opportunity, not a problem. And it becomes, how do I do that? Who can show me? Look for a mentor who can help you like you have and I have, who can help listen to you safely, give you some ideas, and encourage you to find your own solution. Because quite frankly, the world is indeed changing very fast. You can fight it or resist it, but I had a wonderful dinner with a friend, and they leaned over and they said, do you know much about Chat GPT? And I laughed. I said, now you're going to teach me about it, or are you going to teach you about it? Well, my clients aren't using it. I said, well, we've been using it for years now. And it was one of those, I'm an early adapter, and that husband and I both, we turned, when I asked a question, we ask it. Now, Pink said our brains are going to turn into mush, maybe. But right now, my brain is having much more fun learning all the things that Claude can do, Copilot can do. It's
Awesome.
really a different world. Enjoy it. Have
Yeah.
fun.
I love that. Well, I don't know if you know this, but like one of our Twin Legacy Solutions is an AI. We say AI because everyone's using that as a but because AI has been around for a while. But implementation, process improvement, all those things. So we get a mix of reviews. We get companies coming to us like, we know we have to use it. We don't really know how to use it, what to use it for, how do we implement it safely, all those things. And then we get companies that are like, oh, I bought like all these AI products. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, how's your processes? But yeah,
Don't you love it? I love it. I love your stories. It's
I
been a
love it.
pleasure. Yep.
It's been a pleasure too. Andy, so where can people find you? I know I see your book. So On the Brink is the one book, and the other book is refresh my
It's called
memory.
Rethink Retirement. And I have two other books that are all on Amazon under Andrea Simon or Andi Simon. They're all under Andi Simon. LinkedIn is a favorite place for all of us. And frankly, my website, andysimon.com, is where all the books and information there. And Simon Associates is our business. And we love to talk to people. And I have a hunch you do as well. And I've enjoyed this podcast, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much. And you have a podcast as well.
I do. It's called On the Brink with Andi Simon. Okay, my
Just
first
like
one.
your book.
Just like
I
my,
love it.
and my job is to get you off the brink.
I love it. Very, very catchy. Okay, well, thank you, Andy, and thank you to all our listeners out there today. We appreciate you coming up. Until next time, have a lovely day.
Thank you.